Ugh, not another roguelike game. This is a comment I've heard multiple times, and as someone developing a roguelike, it's definitely a little concerning. There seems to be a general fatigue surrounding the roguelike genre, and I think that makes sense. There's a ton of roguelikes coming out nowadays. Seems like every indie dev is making one, and even AAA devs have started dipping their toes in. According to verified market research, the roguelike market was valued at $1 billion in 2023, and has continually grown since then. According to SteamDB, the number of roguelike games released in 2023 was around 1,000, and in 2025, it's almost double. That's crazy. So despite the general annoyance that every game is a roguelike lately, the market is clearly growing. My question is this fatigue justified? Is the genre dead? Should I not even be making a roguelike? And if not a roguelike, then what? First, I just want to clarify what I mean by roguelike. I know there's the Berlin interpretation that's super pedantic and strict, but I'm not using it. When I say roguelike in this video, I'm basically referring to all games that have a run-based structure, maybe some meta progression, some sort of random or procedural generation, you know what I mean. Games like Balatro, Hades, Slay the Spire, Loop Hero, the basic modern definition of a roguelike or a roguelite. So I don't want to see any comments about how X game isn't technically a roguelike because they're all roguelikes for the purpose of this video. So why are there so many roguelike games? I think it boils down to three basic factors: content economics, following super successful games, and genre as marketing. So let's start with one, content economics. What does that even mean? Well, if I were to ask you what the most expensive part about making a game was, what would you think? Well, I'm just gonna give you the answer, it's content. Cutscenes, quests, new areas, this is really where the bulk of a game's budget goes. I mean, think about it. If I were to make a fancy combat system, it might be hard to code at first, but once it's done, it's done. However, every new quest, level, or cutscene in my game requires brand new design, writing, testing, and maybe even new art and animations. Enter the roguelike genre, where you can code one procedural generation algorithm and have seemingly endless level designs, endless content. This looks really attractive for an indie dev where budget and time are extremely limited. If you're smart about it, you only need to make a small amount of content manually, and then with procedural or random generation and run-based gameplay, you'll end up with dozens of hours of gameplay. I think this is actually part of the problem leading to the roguelike fatigue, but I'll come back to that. The second reason there are so many roguelikes is simply that people were trying to follow the success of super popular games. Hades, Balatro, Slay the Spire, shit, even Spelunky are all roguelikes that were absolute smash hits. A couple of them were even made by solo devs. I mean, I can certainly say that I would love to make an estimated $1 million in 8 hours like Balatro did. That would be pretty cool. In an industry like game dev where there's so much uncertainty, I think it's pretty reasonable to try and follow what standout successes did. This leads to the third and final reason, genre is marketing. This isn't something that's unique to game development. Sometimes just the genre of something is marketing in and of itself. I've noticed this in the literary world as well with the romantasy genre. Simply the fact that a book has fairies or orcs or magic and certain lewd aspects is a selling point. For a while, this is how roguelikes were for many players. People were just playing roguelikes just because it was a roguelike. Obviously now there's a lot more fatigue around the genre, but for a while just making a roguelike game gave you a bit of an edge. Now, all three of these reasons are why I started making a roguelike game. My game House in Hand has a pretty simple puzzle game loop where you place tiles on a grid and the tiles merge together, scoring you points. When I started development on this game, I was thinking of basically just making Balatro but with merge 3 gameplay instead of poker gameplay. That was almost a year ago. Oh my god, have I been working on this game for a year? Anyway, back then ripping off Balatro was a bit more of a novel concept. I thought I could ride the coattails of that mega success, but as I developed the game further, I realized that 1, the Balatro formula was not easy to replicate, and 2, just adding roguelike features to a game does not make it a better game. The initial prototype was fun for a few minutes, but after that, it got kinda old. I thought adding deck building and Balatro style jokers, in my game I call them policies, would add depth that would make the game fun to replay over and over. But just adding those things wasn't enough. The game still felt kinda shallow and got old pretty quickly. The puzzle merge 3 gameplay of my game was pretty addicting, but I was noticing that players weren't interacting with the additional mechanics like deck building or policies at all. They were just placing the tiles and were unconcerned about the other features. I was concerned that the game would end up being kind of fun, but largely unsatisfying. In my attempts to replicate the winning Balatro formula, I ended up adding a lot of unnecessary features that didn't actually make the game better. Since then, the game has gone through a lot of iterations, which is honestly a whole separate video, so I'll just spare you the details, but it did get me thinking a lot about what separates roguelike mechanics that add to a game from the ones that don't. And I think today it's in a pretty good spot, and the roguelike features do actually add to the gameplay and aren't just a hollow cash grab, which, if I'm being perfectly honest, that's kind of how they started out. The roguelike features take my simple but fun and tiny game loop and expand on it. And in my mind, that's kind of the power of roguelike mechanics. They can take a simple game loop that's fun for a few minutes and elevate it into being a meaningful experience that's fun for hours or even longer. That's what all my favorite roguelikes do. A game I've been obsessed with lately is The King is Watching. This is kind of a clever sort of combination of city building, real-time strategy, and roguelike. You have your kingdom on the left, and enemies attack you on the right. The gimmick is that your buildings only produce goods or troops, while your gaze, which is a frame that covers a limited amount of grid cells, is on them. This leads to an interesting dynamic of prioritizing various buildings throughout the run. Maybe you really need wheat at one point, so you put your gaze on your wheat-producing buildings, and then switch it to your troop-producing buildings right before the next enemy wave. The basic gameplay loop is really fun for 30 minutes to an hour that a run takes, and after the run, you're taken back to your hub world menu thing, which has a skill tree where you can unlock various upgrades. Some of the upgrades are just straight up improvements that make the game easier. Others, like advisors, which unlock or change portions of the game pretty significantly, make the game easier but add complication. And I think that's the critical part about why the meta progression in The King is Watching feels so meaningful. As you play the game more, you unlock upgrades that reward your understanding of the game. Sure, they make the game more complicated and add new features, but if you can handle that additional complication, you can get really powerful. If all of these mechanics and complications were thrown at you right away, it would be overwhelming, but naturally as you get better at the game, you unlock new mechanics. In my opinion, this game kind of represents what roguelike mechanics look like at their best. A really solid but short gameplay loop, and a meta progression that adds meaningful and satisfying changes to the game so that as I get better and more familiar with the game, there's more things for me to explore. But what do you think? I'd love to hear what you think makes a good roguelike in the comments, and not just because I want to steal your ideas from my own game. So if The King is Watching is what it looks like when roguelike mechanics are done right, what does it look like when they're done wrong? Like I said earlier, I think the fact that roguelike mechanics can expand the playtime of a game is a double-edged sword. In good games like The King is Watching, this padded playtime is a good thing, because as I play, my experience with the game deepens. But in a bad game, this will just feel like a needless grind. Now, I'm not going to give any examples of bad games because that just feels like unnecessary shit talking, and we're all just out here doing our best trying to make games people will like. So you'll just have to imagine a bad roguelike game. And while I personally love a meta progression in a roguelike game, sometimes the skill tree or level up system or whatever it is can just sort of feel like a way to elongate the time it takes you to beat a run. Imagine I have a game and my playtesters are able to beat a run after a couple of attempts and they feel like they've gotten everything out of the game. As a game developer, I might panic and think, man, they only played the game for like 30 minutes. That's well within the Steam refund time limit. Everyone is just going to play my game and refund it. I need to make the game longer. So then what I do is I make the game way harder. Now my playtesters take more than a few attempts to beat the run. In fact, they can't beat the run at all, and they end up giving up after about 30 minutes. I'm in the same predicament I was in beforehand. Well, now I can do a little game design trick to keep you playing. I can add meta progression. Every run you do, you'll get some level up points, and you'll unlock upgrades that make it easier and easier to beat the run until eventually you're able to beat the run again. However, it took you 10 hours instead of 30 minutes. I've padded out the gameplay, but I haven't actually added anything meaningful with the meta progression. I think this is a big factor in the roguelike fatigue. To be honest, I don't even think that's a horrible design strategy. Grinding can be fun. You can look at my playtime in FF14 if you don't believe me. However, if the meta progression doesn't offer anything new in terms of mechanic or content, it can kind of just feel like grinding for grinding's sake. And in some ways, this grind has sort of been codified and shortened into a super succinct experience with all these incremental games coming out, but that's a topic for a whole different video. The point is, there sort of became a roguelike formula. A short gameplay loop that rewards a currency regardless of if you win, and a hub world where you can purchase upgrades that make it easier to win. This is the formula The King is Watching follows, it's the formula Ball Pit follows, it's the formula Loop Hero follows. All great games, by the way, where the formula really works. But I think this formula is part of the fatigue. I can only grind out so many games over and over before I'll just be done with the genre entirely, and if the grinding doesn't lead to anything meaningful, I'm just going to get more fatigued. Additionally, anytime there's a formula in any sort of art that becomes popular, a lot of people try to cash in on the success of the formula. And I feel like a lot of games did try to cash in with gameplay loops that sort of fell flat and progressions that felt like they just existed purely to pad the game time. And it feels like every one of those that comes out adds to the collective groan of the roguelike genre in general. Now, there are bad games in every genre, and you don't often hear, ugh, not another FPS, or ugh, not another RPG. So I do think we have to discuss the obvious. There are a lot of roguelikes coming out. 2026 isn't even over, and already more roguelikes have been released on Steam this year than even just a couple of years ago. It's normal for people to want variety and to think, ugh, not another roguelike, just because there are a ton of them. You know, don't get me wrong, I think Robert Pattinson is one of the greatest actors ever, but does he have to be in literally every movie coming out? I mean, I love all these movies, but surely there are other actors. And I love a lot of roguelike games, but surely there are other genres than roguelike. That leads us to the big question. If not roguelikes, then what? This is a question with no easy answer, at least from a game developer's point of view. The content economics of the roguelike genre are very appealing, and we're continuing to see roguelike games that are absolute bangers come out. So I don't think the problem is with the genre itself, but the unconscious default to the genre. The fact of the matter is, not every game needs to be a roguelike. It's not a one-size-fits-all money-making solution, and adding roguelike mechanics to your game unnecessarily could certainly hurt the game rather than help it. I think developers need to be honest about the game they're making and ask if their game would truly be better as a roguelike, or if they'd be better served to ship something different. If we think of roguelike mechanics as tools to solve problems in game design, maybe there are other tools to solve those problems. Maybe instead of a shallow meta progression to pad out the playtime, the game could just be a shorter, more bespoke experience. I don't know about y'all, but I kind of appreciate shorter games. I don't have a lot of time for gaming these days, and the prospect of having to sink dozens of hours into every game is daunting. Games like A Short Hike have shown that shorter games can be just as meaningful as games that take 10, 40, or even 80 hours. Not every game needs to be super long to be a worthy piece of art. Something I really love about a lot of roguelike games is the pick up and play aspect, but something I've been thinking about a lot lately is that maybe roguelikes don't need to be roguelikes, and they can instead just be pick up and play arcade style games. That's a genre that was very popular in the Flash games era because you generally weren't saving your game because it was on the browser, but it's sort of fallen out of favor lately. Maybe it's time for a comeback. And if your game isn't fun beyond a few minutes or has no replay value, maybe that's not an indication that you should make it a roguelike, but an indication that the gameplay loop itself is shallow and needs work. As for my own game, I do think it stands up as a roguelike, and to be honest, I'm way too far into development to change it now, but I'll really only know once I release the game. I can say this with almost 100% certainty though, I will not be making another deck building roguelike. But if not a roguelike, then what? See what I did there? Anyways, thanks for watching, bye.